Hey guys, it's Trafotin. A unique thing that desktop environments on Linux get is access to extensions. And no, I'm not talking about the extensions that are limited to things like the latest AI product being shoved down your throat. The most popular desktop environments like GNOME and KDE offer extensions, but not all is okay in extension land as you might think. And I want to unpack today some of the extensions that I really like in a situation involving desktop extensions as they are right now that might be a little more precarious than you might think. Have you ever wanted to do window tiling? You know, where your windows automatically arrange themselves? Some would say dynamically. Well, there's this thing out there called Bismuth, which auto-magically rearranges your windows the same way you would get in a tiling window manager. I made a video about the situation of Bismuth last year, but you'd be surprised how little has seemingly changed on Bismuth's GitHub page. It gives the impression that development is still going, even though it's pretty much grinded to a halt. The long story short is that Bismuth relies on Kwin APIs from Plasma 5.26 and below, but it's incompatible with newer versions of Plasma, like Plasma 5.27 and the upcoming Plasma 6. The maintainer had to step down because of personal issues, and he just didn't have enough time to keep the project going. And I want this to serve as a reminder that most developers are not company people, or at least for a Linux company or open source development. They're just normal people who commit their free time and talent, often for little gain whatsoever, just so they can get something that they really want. And it requires a lot of effort to maintain something like a desktop extension. The result of Bismuth leaving development is the creation of a new KDE extension which is compatible with Plasma 5.27, and it's called Polonium, you know, as in the radioactive metal, because Bismuth's a metal? Yeah, it's a terrible name. Polonium targets Kwin's new APIs and supports the same dynamic tiling that Bismuth did. Only difference is Polonium works great with Plasma 5.27. I encountered a few crashes when I was using Polonium personally, but I'm willing to give Polonium a pass here. I wasn't able to replicate any of these crashes reliably, and I'm also pretty confident the bugs are related to NVIDIA. Now, one of the cool things about Polonium is not just its integration in Plasma 5.27 as a Kwin script. The other thing that you get access to is you get an extension that's fully built around Wayland. When Bismuth was first written, X11 was a big name in town, but no more. Wayland is now pretty much the default, and we're starting to see this get pushed more and more by the former X11 developers. And this is why Polonium targets Wayland first and foremost. But this is where the plot actually thickens. Recently, the lead developer of Polonium, Zero Xenophore, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, has said that the current codebase of Polonium is unsustainable. And this is actually due to a large part because of changes between Plasma 5.27 and Plasma 6. And the APIs for Kwin basically are just being shuffled around just a little bit, and it's making it harder for the early implementation of Polonium when it was first spun up to work as well with newer iterations of Plasma or Plasma 6. Since Polonium is from the middle of 2023, it's accrued a bit of technical debt as Plasma 5.27 transitions over to Plasma 6, which is coming up very soon. What needs to happen now is that the development of Kwin continues to refine and fix bugs and make sure all of the core protocols and Plasma guidelines are all met for the release date of Plasma 6. And it's all really important because KDE is a fast-moving target and can't slow down just to support one tiny little extension. And it's a really complicated situation. But the basic gist of Polonium is Polonium has to play catch-up with this large, massive, ongoing development that KDE is doing. And the situation is probably more complicated when you take into account that Plasma 5.27, though there is quite a bit of change from Plasma 5.27 from Plasma 5.26, there's still a big gap between Plasma 5.27 and Plasma 6. So what the developers are doing is they're basically hunkering down to fix the existing code. That way, when Plasma 6 is released, they can then adjust their code to work with the new APIs set in place with Kwin on Plasma 6. And this entire situation might seem like KDE is a really unstable platform, but that's okay. You could just pick GNOME. Wait, what? Unfortunately, picking GNOME as a platform hasn't been smooth sailing for people who try to build GNOME extensions. The long story short is that GNOME's developers have been making lots of changes and adjustments to their windowing compositor Mutter. I know Mutter's a lot more than that, and it's actually a lot of components that collectively make it so that this is the thing that makes sure your windows appear when you open your programs. The most important change that GNOME's developers are making is they're moving away from GNOME JavaScript, or GJS, I'll continue to refer to it as. And there's a bit to unpack here. The primary reason GNOME's developers made this change was it was really difficult for people to get into interacting with GNOME's APIs with JavaScript because they're used to writing JavaScript one way, but then when they come to write a GNOME extension, they have to learn to write JavaScript a different way. And it's not that bad of a change because GNOME JavaScript is different, but not too different. It's been said that people can easily script their way or program their way around to update older versions of their script, so it's not too bad, but it does mean that extensions do need to be rewritten in order to work on GNOME versions higher, like say on GNOME 45, which is the default on most rolling release distributions, on Fedora, or even on the next version of Ubuntu. But notice here I didn't include the stable distributions. I'm talking about like the Debians of the world, for example. This means that extension makers need to maintain 2 versions of their extension. Wait, that doesn't sound easier. The reason why a lot of people seem to be up in arms online is that extension makers are now forced to maintain 2 versions of their extensions. The ones that are written in GNOME JavaScript for anything lower than GNOME 45, and the ones that are written in normal standard JavaScript, like every extension for GNOME 45 up to GNOME 47 and future versions of GNOME. You'll hear complaints online about people saying how they can't trust GNOME because GNOME is going to break everybody's extensions, and they continue to do so every yearly release. But I want to highlight an issue here which I think most people avoid or don't think about, and it's a couple things. It's multi-layered here. When most people heard about GNOME moving away from GNOME.js and moving to standard JavaScript, most people learned about it from a blog post. They didn't learn about it from a fancy press conference, and they didn't learn about it from a curated video from the GNOME's YouTube channel, or from someone who tried to make it more user-focused, or from a pop-up that would appear on like GNOME Software Center, or in like a welcome menu or something. They saw this in a blog post. And I don't say this to send hate towards the way of this GNOME blog post, because I think the blog post is very well written, but I think it's worth examining when you read these blog posts who they're actually targeted for. When GNOME's engineers write this blog post, they're not writing it for the public. They're writing it for their contributors and developers so they can better make use of GNOME as a platform. Sort of a way of saying, hey guys, heads up, we're about to do something. Just be aware this is happening, and we're sorry, but this is something that we need to do because we think it's something that could lead to the betterment and sustainability of the platform going forward. And it's actually something that's really important, especially if you want to get newer contributors. That's the biggest reason why they chose to move to standard JavaScript. But the reason I'm taking the time to highlight communication in particular here is the general sense that you will get from people who are GNOME users is that there's a lack of communication. And it's because there is a genuine lack of communication, or rather, a communication team. The people who read these blog posts without any prior knowledge tend to read it the same way they would a blog post from, let's say, a proprietary software company. Like, imagine Apple during one of their events. That's the way people view this. They imagine someone like the used car salesman, Craig Federighi, getting on stage and saying, "At Apple, we believe the iPhone revolutionized my life because Siri can now do generative AI." But the one thing that I want to emphasize is GNOME is not, and while there are people who are paid to develop in open source around GNOME, it is not anywhere near the level of Windows and macOS when it comes to commercial development. And the same is also true about KDE. And I don't want to excuse poor communication, because when a lot of people read these blog posts, they're probably reading them from a Linux content mill website that just spits out the same blog post again, but in a slightly different way so that they can't be filed against for plagiarism, that kind of thing. Even if it's unintentional, it doesn't matter what you originally intended when you wrote something. What matters more is how people perceive it. But we also need to be realistic about the situation and what extensions actually are. GNOME extensions and extensions of KDE are typically not built with specific functionality in mind. Now, that might sound crazy, because while I might describe something like Polonium, for example, or Dash to Dock, you look at them and you say, well, they seem to have pretty clear-cut goals. But these extensions, while they might be simple, need to interact with a lot of convenient APIs that are built into both GNOME and KDE. And there's no one framework or stable thing that actually does all of this. And that sounds kind of crazy, but it's actually not that crazy when you consider the one reason why GNOME and KDE built their extensions around JavaScript. It's browser extensions. Chrome and Firefox also have a stable framework, but they constantly poke and prod their APIs. Sometimes they add stuff to their APIs, sometimes they delete stuff because it's being abused by scumbags in the wild. And the same is true with the extensions that you use when you use GNOME or KDE. Your extensions need to have the ability to do or see specific things in real time. I use Caffeine, the GNOME shell extension, which prevents your computer from falling asleep, because if I use a controller, my computer falls asleep. And no, this is on KDE too, not just GNOME, it's just a general Linux thing. But you have to think about all of the little actions that go into such a simple extension like Caffeine, because Caffeine needs to be able to detect it when your computer shouldn't go to sleep, but the extension developer needs to make a decision how Caffeine is going to do that. For example, let's say you're watching a movie. You want to have your movie in a full screen window. Therefore, Caffeine is set up to use GNOME's API to look and see, hey, is there a window that's using a full screen? And if a window is using a full screen, then I will continue to stop your computer from falling asleep. And all of this needs to be done in such a way that it doesn't hinder performance, because people are going to complain either to their extension developers or to GNOME's developers that this extension slowed down their system, or GNOME is garbage and breaking my extensions. Pick one of the two. But I want to actually take an examination of something that looks like this in practice. And I have been bombarded with comments about how I got window tiling on GNOME, and the answer is I did literally nothing. You have to thank the people behind the Forge extension, and it gives you similar window tiling like you get on i3 or Sway. Some would say manual tiling. That's the last one, I promise. Earlier last year in September, Jose Marinon, the lead developer of Forge, announced that he's no longer able to continue work on the project. And this has affected the project greatly, because a lot of the developers who are helping out the Forge project have to go in and pick up the slack that Jose leaves behind. And he's trying to help them through the process too, and figuring out how to properly port Forge to GNOME 45, and fixing some annoying bugs. And when I've used GNOME 45, the toggle menu where you can toggle the tiling that's used in Forge is totally absent from the GUI, but you can use the extension manager by Matthew Jakeman to just access that menu. GNOME and KDE can't just stop or slow down their development just because a few desktop extensions won't work. And this is the part where I tell you that please be nice to your desktop environment developers, please be nice to your extension developers, and please understand that yes, you might not be happy about your favorite extension breaking when you upgrade to the newest version of KDE, like say you upgrade to KDE 6. I know it's a lot, but the one important thing that I want to emphasize is please understand the complications in maintaining a desktop extension. But the one thing that I will do is I want to advocate for the assistance of extension maintainers so that you can go out there and help your extension maintainers keep their stuff updated, or you can submit bugs or help the KDE or GNOME people to constantly make the things that everyone uses better. It's a thankless task, and you'll find a lot of people on the GitHub repos of GNOME Forge or Polonium who are just users like you and me. They don't have time to properly learn JavaScript or GNOME's APIs or Kwin's APIs. But the one thing that I can do is that I can leverage my platform to highlight a few of these issues about why your extension developers need your help and why you should give back to and support things that you use and the things that you love. So why don't you go leave a like on this video? Leave a like on this video if you like using desktop extensions, or if you like coding your own extension for your tiling window manager. And if you go to the description below, I've also left a list of the GNOME shell extensions that I use and a link to Polonium if you want to go give them a helping hand. Thank you for watching. I will see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your week.